Good morning. Thank you for agreeing to share your story with us. My name is Agnieszka Ilwicka-Karuna, Aga, and I'm here with Elmer Nelson, and we are from the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at University of Florida. Today is March 8th, 2024, and we are in Gainesville at the Village. And I'm interviewing Elmer Nelson. Elmer, Oli.
Oli.
Oli. Do I have your permission to record this interview?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Can we please start with your full name and could you spell it for us?
Elmer George Nelson Jr., nickname Oli, and that's ElmerGeorgenelson, I think. And my nickname Oli is OLE.
Perfect. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background? Where are you from? Where were you born?
Born in Hector, Minnesota in 1936. Lived there till I was in about the third grade, and then we moved to Casson, Minnesota. Lived there till I was in the sixth grade, and then we moved 3 miles north to Manorville, Minnesota, and was there for 2 years, and then moved for a year and a half to Aiken, Minnesota, up in the north, and then back to Manorville to a farm. And I lived there until I graduated in '54, went to the University of Minnesota for 1 year, ran out of money and ideas at the same time, and joined the Air Force.
Okay, before we will talk about that period of your time, I would like to come back to Hector. Can you please describe me your memories of the place and people from that place?
Yeah. It was a farming community about 70 miles west of Minneapolis. It was the birthplace, and it's where my father grew up. So I had uncles and nephews and cousins around, mostly in the surrounding farms. And so we lived in town. My dad was running a filling station in town, very small town, but we did have 5 churches. We had 3 Lutheran churches, a Catholic church, and a Baptist church. And the town was mostly Scandinavian, Swedish and Norwegians. And we were on the railroad. As a matter of fact, our home in town was about a block and a half south of the tracks. So I smashed a lot of pennies on the rails. It was a good place to grow up, good people. And a lot of relatives. So,
do you have any stories from your childhood that you would like to share with us?
Those were the days when Mother would turn us out. If you weren't in school, Mother would turn us out in the morning after breakfast, and you had to come home for supper. A lot of people say when the street lights came on, you came home, but up in Minnesota, the street lights may not come on until 9 o'clock at night during the summer. So we had what was called the Angelus. At 6 o'clock, all the church bells rang, and that was when we went home for dinner. Wherever you were for lunch, that mother fed you. But we had a movie theater in town, but mostly we just kind of ran the streets. There was a river we would go down to and swim in. It was a relatively idyllic growing up, I think. Of course, the war came, and so we had a huge garden. Mother was a canner, so she got an extra ration of sugar for canning. As a matter of fact, about 3-4 months ago, I was going through some old papers. I found my war ration book. And it still had a coupon in there for a pair of shoes, so I guess I could go out and get shoes if I wanted to. But there were a lot of shortages. We, as kids, spent a lot of time looking for scrap iron. If you got 50 pounds of scrap iron, you got a free movie ticket. And we would have patriotic parades. And my dad was an air raid warden in the middle of Minnesota. I was a junior airplane spotter, and no Japanese planes ever got to us. We did a good job. And then, I watched my older cousins go off to war. Most of them came back. And then we moved from Hector and over to Casson, Minnesota.
You said most of them came back, but what about those that haven't? Were there any memorials organized by the community?
No official memorials. There was always a funeral, of course. And the families would change the color of their star in their window. But that was just the way it was then.
During the war period, did you have opportunity to go to school?
Oh yes, yeah. I was fortunate. I was reading when I was about 4 years old. I loved comic books and the comics in the newspapers, so I would lay on the floor and try to read them, and Mother would help me, and I learned to read the funnies. And of course, a lot of them were related to the war. We were very, very patriotic.
Can you describe this more?
Well, like I said, the kids would have parades down the street. We followed, some of us followed the news very carefully. We all saved our pennies and dimes to buy a war bond. As I said, we would scrub the countryside for scrap metal, especially aluminum. We actually would pick up cigarette packs that was thrown away and strip out the inside. There was aluminum foil in there, and turn all that in. So for kids, it was an exciting time. So for the parents of those who left, it wasn't quite as exciting. And we had behind us was the Gundermans, a young lady that had escaped from Germany to the U.S. and was working, and then brought her father over. And he could speak no English. I could speak no German, but we spent a lot of time together conversing. He was a big gardener, and he taught me how to grow potatoes, and we liked each other a lot. And we could converse even though we both spoke in different languages. And that was a good place to grow up. And then my dad got promoted and he became a Watkins dealer, if you know what that is. It's household and farming supplies and goods, and and things of that nature. As a matter of fact, I still have Watkins vanilla in the cupboard. And he was very good at that. And he got promoted, and he had to move to Winona, Minnesota, to the headquarters. And he had basically the entire Mississippi Valley that he supervised and went out and trained people. Traveled a lot. For whatever reason, we moved to Casson, and he would go to Winona, which was about 80 miles away during the week and work, and then come home on the weekends. And the marriage broke down. And they split, and we moved. Mother and my sister and brother moved 3 miles north to a smaller town, about 500 people, and lived there for 2 years. And then, of course, I was a kid, so I don't know all the details. But we had to move up to Aiken, Minnesota, live with my uncle for a year. Moved out of that and into a 3-room shack. We had electricity, but we didn't have any water. And then Mother had met a farmer back down in Manorville, Minnesota, and he kept coming up to visit, and they got married. And we moved back out to his farm. And so for my high school years, from 9th grade on, I lived on the farm back in Manorville. And after that, I went up to Minnesota for, like I say, 1 year, and realized it was a very small school, and I was not prepared for college. I was the valedictorian of the school and thought I was ready for college, and went up there and found out, man, I was nowhere near. And we were the last graduating class in that school, and they consolidated it with Casson again. And that's where my future wife went for her senior year. She was 1 year behind me. And she was graduated salutatorian in that school. And like I say, I got a job with Minneapolis Moline test driving tractors, and spent the winter doing that. And I'd always wanted to go in the Air Force. That was my whole object of going to college. I was going to college, get an ROTC, and go in the Air Force to fly. I had my first airplane ride when I was 6. A J3 Piper Cub, sitting on my dad's lap. So I fell in love with flying. And was casting about what to do, and a friend told me, was commiserating one evening that I couldn't get into ROTC because I couldn't go to college. And he said, he had just read about this new program the Air Force is expanding, and they reopened the aviation cadet program. So I went and tested for that, got in, qualified for both pilot and navigator training. And the recruiter said, well, if you go pilot, it's going to be about 8 months before we've got a class for you. But if you go into navigator training, I take you next month. Become a navigator. When you finish that, reapply for pilot training, be double rated. So I went in, became a navigator, was fortunate enough to qualify for weapon. Those days they call a radar observer, a backseater and a two-seat fighter. Trained for that. Went to my first station, which was Glasgow, Montana, and immediately applied again for pilot training. And yes, you're qualified, but you are in a critical career field.
Because?
We were short of ROs, of backseaters. So as soon as we will take you into pilot training. Several years later, they reclassified us as we weren't critical anymore. So I applied, and then I was too old. So spent my career as a backseater, which was still a lot of fun. And travel around, stationed as I told you, in many places. And finally...
yeah, we will talk about this. You mentioned that by the end of high school, you met your future wife. So...
No, I met my when we moved out to the farm, she was the neighbor farm girl. So basically, we grew up almost together. She, when my folks would go out and I would have a date or whatever, she would come and babysit my brother and sister. And pretty soon I kept coming back from my dates earlier and earlier. And my mother was saying, you date Grace, ask date, I know one. And sure enough, I think on about the first date, I realized this is the one I want to marry. Took a while to convince her, but...
How old were you when you already knew?
Well, when we dated, I was, excuse me, senior in high school, so I was 17? And by golly, she waited. I couldn't get married until I got my commission. So that took the college and training, and that took 2.5 years. So she waited for me all that time while I went to, of course, San Antonio, Texas for basic training, and then to Harlingen, Texas for navigator training. And while I was there, she moved down to Harlingen. Of course, I was a cadet. So about every other Sunday, I could go visit her. And as soon as we graduated, we jumped in a car, drove up to Minnesota, got married, and then went back to Waco, Texas. And she stuck with me for 66 years.
How was to have a family in Waco, Texas? You were just a young couple living in Waco, Texas. How was it back then?
We lived in a lady's house. We had 2 rooms, a bedroom, and a larger room which had been fixed up as a kitchen and had so that we were there for about 6 months. Wonderful lady, and Grace was pregnant. I think she got pregnant on her honeymoon, and then went up to Glasgow, Montana, where the nearest town was 20 miles away. And that Glasgow, Montana was where my mom and dad went when they got married. It was during the Depression. And Dad had lost his job. He was working for Minnesota woolen mills. And they went out because they were building what at that time was the world's largest earthen dam across the Missouri. And he worked there as a laundry delivery man. He had a route. And lived their first winter up there in a tent. If you can imagine doing that. And then they built and Mom said, well, then we built a house. That house was about the size of a kitchen back there. And lived there for a year, and then she got pregnant with me, and they decided to move back to Minnesota. So I was stationed at where I was conceived, which I thought was kind of neat, and saw a lot of the places that they always talked about. And the night that our first child was born, of course, it was about 11 o'clock at night when it started. We had to drive 20 miles to town to the hospital. When we had our second child there, by that time we had built a hospital on the base. So we had our first 3 children at Glasgow in very quick succession. And then started moving around.
What is this? I'm just trying to understand this experience of moving around, because every military family has this experience behind that you live in one place, you get accustomed to it, and then you have to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So how was it for your family and for you in particular?
We actually enjoyed it. We got to see all kinds of different places. There was a consistency because every place we went was an Air Force base. Every place we went was a fighter squadron, which was a very tightly knit unit. And we were all in the same boat. So you made friends quickly. And every once in a while you crossed paths as we traveled around. The Air Force always moved us. You just didn't accumulate a lot of stuff, other than my wife used to joke that by the time we retired, she had curtains and drapes that would fit any window you could throw at her. And it was. We both loved the Air Force very much. It just amazed me because I was gone so much that maybe that's why our marriage lasted. I don't know, because she used to joke, "Well, I get vacations from you every once in a while," and because there were times I would have to go and then wait to stand up things and bring her later. When I went to the Philippines, it was about 8 months before she could come over. And then when she did, of course, I'd be home for 59 days, and then I'd be gone for 59 days. So.
What's the secret of maintaining relationship in such circumstances? And I'm talking more about universal sense, not necessarily for the Air Force pilots.
I really am not sure. I think one thing we really enjoyed getting back together. We didn't take each other for granted. And especially since I was flying fighters, every day I may not come back. And we had to live through that. We lost a lot of friends along the way. Attended a lot of funerals, and she, comforted a lot of other wives. And it was a totally different lifestyle, but a good one. We missed it when we retired.
In terms of the social relationships, I know that for pilots it's very unique. Mm-hmm. the kind of friendship and comrades feeling and belonging into the group. This is very unique experience, so can you please elaborate more on that?
Well, we trusted our lives to each other. You had to have, even if you didn't like that guy, and there were people we didn't like, you trusted them. I may not like you as a person, but we'll go out and fight together. Or go up and have fun together. And I think that was one of the things that at least I enjoyed most. Being in the Air Force and flying, especially tactical aircraft, was just exciting. Like I say, we had hours and hours of fun interspersed with moments of pure terror. But yeah, it was, like I say, we both missed that when we retired. It was unique to have people around you that you absolutely trusted. And you knew that even if you had some difficulties together, that person would have your back. And the wives were the same way. Yeah. There were exceptions, but and the kids, every time we'd move, they'd get all upset because they were having to leave their friends. And then within a month after we were where we were, they learned to make friends quickly, and other Air Force kids, military kids, and then they loved where they were then, and they hated to leave that when we left there. So, and when I speak to them now, they admit that, yeah, we miss those days.
Yeah, you lived in multiple locations. It was Texas, Oregon, and then...
I think we lived in 22 different houses. Sometimes you'd be on the base and you'd move 3 times. Because the Air Force was expanding through this period. And so housing changed. Sometimes you'd have to rent off base, and then they'd build the houses, you'd move back to base. In Glasgow, we lived in 3 different places in 4 years.
Your service dates were from 1956 to 1978, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You also have witnessed multiple political changes in America and worldwide.
Yeah. Excuse me.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, especially growing up during World War II when everything was very patriotic. Probably it wasn't until I was in my late teens that I started to become aware of politics. Excuse me. My dad was a diehard Republican. And I thought Roosevelt walked on water. Of course, we were too young to have any real discussions, but then after the war ended, and I was started to become old enough to realize that the image of a united America didn't exist. We were politically divided, we were socially divided, and I remember coming to that awareness and being very, very disappointed because I had a different image. But it was more exciting, I will say that. And of course, being then in the military, we were officially apolitical. We had taken an oath to defend the Constitution, to support and defend. So it didn't matter who or what party was in office. We had our structure. At Friday night beer call, we may have discussions. But in our professional life, it was simply politics did not exist. Electoral politics. Any institution is socially political. And you learn how to maneuver through that. But then since then, our country has changed so dramatically. We have so many factions, and we used to have great political discussions. You can't do that now. If you disagree with me, you're evil. You're stupid. And I probably could adjust to that, but I'm not gonna. There's nothing that we can't do as a nation, as a group, if we would just discuss our differences, come to a solution, and do it. But now, no, we're not going to do that solution, although it's going to work, but it's yours and I'm not going to do it. And this is, I fear for my grandkids. As a matter of fact, I fear the next 4 to 8 years.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about your personal beliefs. Because on the beginning of our conversation, before we turn on the camera, you mentioned that the chairs that we have here are coming from the church. Can we talk a little bit about your personal faith or the faith that you grew up in?
It's been a winding journey. I was raised in the Lutheran Church. I was raised in the Swedish Lutheran Church. We had a German Lutheran Church and a Norwegian Lutheran Church in the town I grew up in. And moving then, when we made our third move to Manorville, Minnesota, there was only what we call a church and a half in town. We had a congregational church, and we had a Catholic church sometimes. They had, priests would come in and hold services. And then they had a building, which became a community building eventually. But there were so few Catholics in town that they couldn't support a church. So I became, in my teen years, I was very active in the Congregational church. And my wife was a Lutheran church, and they went to the Lutheran church in Casson, 3 miles away. And that's a church that I had lived almost next door to when we lived in Casson. And so when we got married, of course, we got married in that church. And then we went in the Air Force where we had the base chapel. And you had the chaplain of the current flavor in there. And they had to be officially non-denominational. It was, you'd usually have a Catholic chaplain and a Protestant chaplain. Occasionally, if the base was big enough, you'd have a Jewish chaplain also. But normally, people of the Jewish faith would either go into town, or a rabbi would come out to the chapel and hold services. So became very non-denominational. I was simply a Christian. And the flavor of the month would change. And never met a bad chaplain in the service. They were all great guys. And then right at the end, we started to get female chaplains. So we became denominationally almost a universalist. I didn't care what church I went to. I just would try to find one that I felt comfortable in and that we could form friendships in. And then when we retired, we ended up in the Methodist Church. That was a church in town that our neighbors went to, and they invited us, and we ended up going there, and I've been a Methodist ever since. And jokingly I say, I'm still a recovering Lutheran. But
Holly, I didn't ask you about your family background, like where your parents actually were coming from.
My dad was first generation Swedish. His father emigrated over. My mother was pure Irish, as my on my father's side, they were pure Swedish. But she was second or third, and I'm not sure which. Her family started come over when they were building the railroad across the U.S. And their goal was to get to Oregon and settle there. They had been, of course, they were railroad people, but they really wanted to get out where the big oak forests were and go into the lumber business. They got to Minnesota camping, and one of the brothers, the story goes, one of the brothers looked around and said, "What kind of trees are these?" And they wanted to go to the west where the big oaks were. And they looked at, those are oak trees. They settled right there. They started a town, and were there that's where they settled. So I'm half Irish and half Swedish. And it used to be fun watching those two groups get together on holidays at our house. You had the Swedes that sat around and, yeah, sure, very solid verse, though. And you had the Irish that were bouncing off the walls. And they loved each other. That was the amazing thing. So, good back on and Grace, his mother was Norwegian. She was second or third generation. And her father was German and very proud of it. And while we were over stationed in the Netherlands, they came over to visit because he wanted to go to his native town. He was second generation. He was first generation American. Grandmother, his mother kind of lived with him, lived in a neighboring town, but and a sweet lady spoke no English. Refused to learn English. That's where he got his ethnic pride. So they came over to visit, and he went to his, we better wait for that to quit. Mm-hmm. That's grandfather from the Netherlands, where we bought it. So they went up to their home village, his home village, and found out it was in Poland. It's in that area which is sometimes Polish, sometimes German. It just kind of goes back and forth. He was not a happy camper. So that's our ethnic background.
Also, he thought that he's Swedish, but actually ethnically he was Polish too.
No, he was German, and you would not tell, and he spoke fluent German. And yeah, when he found out that at that time, the village was Polish. It was on that side of the border. At another time, the border would shift a little and they would be German. So he didn't like that.
I want to ask you about the food from your home. But the home that you grew up in, the one that your parents served you, do you have any memories related to food?
Mother, when she was a child, was farmed out to a Jewish family. And when I say farmed out, she went there in the daytime and worked in the Jewish home. And she learned Jewish cooking. As she grew up, she went into restaurants. She worked in one of the big automats in Minneapolis. In those days, it was like a post office boxes, and you'd go in and put your money in and take out your food and eat it. And she was a cook, and they trained her as both a cook and a baker. She was a magnificent cook and baker. And of course, during the war, we ate what we got. But having relatives on the farm and a huge garden, we ate well and we ate healthy because we didn't get a lot of meat. But so yeah, she was, when we had moved out on the farm with my stepdad, especially on Sundays, we'd be getting ready to eat and someone would drive in the driveway and come in and eat with us. She fed everybody. When we lived in Hector, close to the railroad, we were frequently visited by hobos, not bums. These were hobos. They would come to the back door and knock, ask if there was anything to do, and she would always feed them. And I had some great conversations as a little lad sitting on the back porch with them and talking. At one time I thought, that's not a bad life. I might want to be a hobo, Mom, and I got corrected quickly. But I've really had a good life. I really have.
What was the favorite food that your wife made?
That my wife made? Mm-hmm. Boy. When we got married, she was scared to death because she did not know how to cook. It was like my mother. My sister didn't know how to cook. When mother was in the kitchen cooking, nobody was in the kitchen with her. Men could come into the kitchen to eat and to wash the dishes. And it was almost the same with my mother didn't start teaching my sister how to cook until after my sister was married and mother got old. But we ate very eclectic. We really didn't have any ethnic dishes because mother could cook everything. But there were some things that were marked and that we all remember, and that was like the soup. Especially during the winter, there was a big cooker sat on the back of the stove, and all the leftovers went in it. So we had a soup stew that constantly evolved. But you could come in any time of the day and get a bowl, eat it, go back out into the cold. Mother was a renowned baker. People would call her and ask her to cook special cakes for them. And it got to be fun. She would never share her recipes, ever. I have them now. And I'm trying to transfer them over in my computer. But I did know one of her secrets. When she was too busy to really, put a cake together, she would buy, Duncan Hines cake mix and put an extra egg in it. And people would rave about it. So, but as you can see, we ate well.
Did you cook yourself too?
No, I was not allowed in the kitchen but to wash the dishes. And my wife's family was kind of the same. But so when we got married, neither one of us knew how to cook. But obviously we did pretty well. Grace learned quickly. She became a great cook. And I've got some of her recipes that my daughters right now want to get from me. Especially we have a wedding coming up next month. So my number 2 granddaughter is getting married.
Oh, congratulations.
But we had 2 boys and 2 girls. And we lost both boys eventually. But my youngest son was married and had a daughter before he died. His wife, Bev, who lives right over here in Oak Crest, was about 8 months pregnant with the second child when he died. But everybody, all my kids live within 20 miles of here.
How did they die?
Hmm?
How did you lose? What happened to your sons?
Well, my youngest daughter married a local boy. So they live right over here in Hale. My oldest daughter has been through a few husbands, and she lives right now over not Fairbound, about 20 miles, about 15 miles east of here, Hawthorne. And of course, my 2 sons are dead now. So, and my daughter-in-law lives right over here in Oak Crest, and her 2 daughters work here in town. the youngest did work right here in the village. So, yeah, all my kids and grandkids, the grandkids are starting to spread out. But my youngest granddaughter has moved back to town, and she's getting married, like, say, a week from now. And my youngest granddaughter is a junior at the University of Florida. So I do not lack for family.
I would like to ask you about your experience in the Air Forces, both as a pilot and as a soldier.
I was not a pilot. I was a backseater.
Backseat, yes.
Went through many titles, ended up as a weapons systems officer, is what they called us. I would navigate and set up the weapons.
You had to make often the decisions.
Oh, yeah. It was my job to find the target, to direct us to it. And if it was a ground target, of course, we would attack it. If it was another airplane, then I was the second set of eyes in the back. The pilot could concentrate on the target aircraft, the one we were after, and I was, of course, locking up the weapons on it, but also keeping my eye out for somebody sneaking up on us. It was a ball. Until it got real. Then it got serious.
So can we talk more about the time when it actually became real?
Yeah, I was flying in some of the most advanced aircraft the Air Force had. And then I went to Vietnam. Went to, like I say, I was officially stationed in the Philippines, to the old Canberra, B-57 Canberra, two-seat tactical bomber. It was built by the British. We obtained the license to it, and Martin Aircraft built an American version of it. So it was a two-seater, carry, 10,000 pounds of ordnance. We had either 4 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings like a fighter, or 8 50 calibers or 4 20 millimeters. And the 20 millimeters were the forerunner of the Gatling gun. Instead of the barrels turning, they call it a revolver. It's like a revolver, but it fired very fast. So those bombers had been used by the Air Force primarily as what we call pathfinders. If the balloon went up, they went in first. They were loaded with electronics to jam the enemy's radars and to seek them out and seek out airfields and then attack them. Mostly low-level work. They had decided that they had lived their life, and the last squadrons were in Japan. So they stripped everything out of them and were sending them back to the boneyard. They got to the Philippines, and suddenly we were in the beginning of Vietnam, and they suddenly found out they needed a tactical aircraft which could do interdiction and close air support. And they had the old A1E, which was basically a Navy aircraft, which did a marvelous job at that, propeller. but they wanted a jet, so they stripped everything out of the B-57s in the Philippines and then remanufactured them adjusted the bomb bay and that kind of thing. They never put the electronics back in. So we flew World War II tactics, eyeball. Pilots used to joke that their electronics was a rheostat on the gun sight that would make it brighter or dimmer. And in the back, I had a TACAN set, which gave me direction and distance from a TACAN station. And I did have an early warning system back there that I could listen to the enemy radar. So I knew when they were searching us, when they locked on, that kind of thing. But other than that, I sat back there and navigated, and another set of eyes. And when we would attack, I would figure out the beginning altitude and the release altitude. And then as we were coming down, I would count down and tell the pilot when to release. And be on the lookout for being shot at. So we were back in old World War II tactics, and we'd fly virtually every day. Weather would knock us out, and truces would knock us out. But otherwise, if I flew at noon one day, I would fly at 10 o'clock, and roughly 2 hours earlier the next day. We worked around the clock backwards. We flew day and night. Night we would go north and hunt trucks. And in the daytime we would fly close air support for the Army and the Marines.
How many people you remember being involved in the area where you served?
Oh, that's too big a question, the thousands. But in my squadron, we had about 22 guys. That let us, we could, like I say, we could launch, normally, like I said, we would go out single ship. Sometimes in the daytime, you'd go out in twos. But flying at night with no lights, it wasn't smart to turn on your lights because they knew where you were. We would usually be single ship, working with a flare ship, which would drop flares and light up the area that we were going into. Hunting trucks, sometimes we'd use strictly eyeball.
And where was that? Where exactly?
Well, Vietnam. My first year there, I was at Da Nang, which is just below the border. And then as they built up, that was not a good airfield for us. Then we moved down to Phan Rang, which they built. And we flew off an aluminum plank runway, which was fun because as we rolled, you'd get this wave in front of you. You know, the planks were joined, and as you were pushing against them, so the runway would walk. And periodically, they'd have to go to the end of the runway, pick those planks up, go back and put them at the but rarely got shot at Phan Rang on the ground. And up at Da Nang, we got sniped at a lot and did launching mortars into us and that kind of thing. But again, it was sporadic. But the only ground fire that did any damage to us is they killed our Jeep. It was parked outside our operations building, and the Jeep took a mortar. So we had to go out and steal another one from the Army.
What was the scariest moment of that time from your service?
Oh. Probably the scariest was we were after this daylight raid, and there was 2 of us. And there was this, the North Vietnamese had moved we're setting up a radar site fairly far south. We were not allowed, we could go to route pack, we could only go about 1/3 of the way up into North Vietnam, because above that you ran into fighters and missiles, and we were not equipped to deal with them. But they were moving, looked to be like a missile site down south. And we were lined up for another attack. We were going on what we call a milk run. Not a dangerous mission. Just go up and blow some stuff up. So our wingman had a photographer in the back seat, and he was going to take pictures. Well, we took off and headed out, and they diverted us north to get this truck, this missile site. So we got up there, and it's sitting on top of a plateau. My first suspicion that was a flak trap, but so we rolled in on it, and we set up a clover leaf. You go up, you come off, you come back in 90 degree, 2 aircraft, so you work a circle around it. My pilot and the other pilot, who were close buddies, decided to make a contest of it, see how tight they could make it. And we came off one, and I was telling my pilot, "You're too slow, you're too slow." And coming off top, coming back down, I says, "You're too slow." And when he pulled, we hit the jet wash of the other aircraft. And it turned us sideways, and we stalled. And we're at the bottom of our dive run, and the airplane started to fall. Fortunately, I said it was on top of a bluff. And when we were falling, we went over the edge of the bluff. And he had enough altitude to kick it out straight and pull it out. When we stalled, I knew we were dead. But Marty Keller, just, I say, somebody's hand was on us, because the ground fell away from us. But the rest of the time was nights were the scariest, because you could see the tracers coming at you. In the daytime, you couldn't see that. But the worst hit we took was in the daytime. Like I say, none of my pilots and I were ever wounded. The airplane got shot up a little bit, but you'd come home and the crew chief, you'd apologize to him for bringing the airplane back with holes in it. But it was an exciting time. Glad I did it. Won't do it again.
Given now what we know about the Vietnam War, what do you think?
We have got to stop going into military operations we don't intend to win. We have not won a military operation since World War II. We tied in Korea. Since then, we go in to help an ally, and we back out. What in the world is that all about? Oh, it's just like right now. When we went into Afghanistan. Oh, but we're killing so many people. What the devil do they think war is about? You kill the enemy until they stop. But oh no, we only want to go in and punish them. For one thing, that is against the international laws of war. And right now, while we're not on the ground fighting, we're helping out, and all of a sudden we're not sending them the equipment we promised. We're abandoning them. What kind of a country have we become? We simply don't carry through. We've become way, way too enmeshed in whose political solution is going to win. We don't solve problems. We look to take credit for a solution. The border, that's solvable. But neither party would let the other party help solve it, because it's our solution has to win. We've really lost sight of what it is this country should be about.
And what do you think this country should be about?
A place where anybody is free to do what they want. Succeed or fail, that's up to you. And that we work together on solutions. And we just are not doing that. We want our party or our group, even our company, to own the solution. I long for the old days when we, now admittedly, I grew up in World War II, so I probably don't understand the real realities. But it just seemed like everybody was working together. And now, and we had a goal. I don't see us really having goals anymore. We have projects. And like I said, I'll use the word moderate. I moderate a discussion group here on current events. And we are wildly diverse here at the village, wonderfully diverse. And with very strong social and political beliefs, and yet we manage in that group. I have two rules for the group. You may disagree, but you may not be disagreeable, and you may not talk over another person. And we have some great discussions, and we all walk out friends. Still disagreeing, but we're friends. That's probably the high point of my week, is that group. And why can't we be like that? Did you hear the president's speech last night, State of the Union? This side was cheering wildly, that side was sitting on their hands. You can't solve problems that way. So, we'll see.
When you were in Vietnam, did you also have in your units World War II veterans?
Very, very few. I was with the World War II veterans early on when we were dealing with the Cold War. So I flew with a lot of guys who had flown in World War II. And learned a lot from them because they knew what they were talking about.
So what was the main lesson that you got from them? What they were teaching you?
Do what's necessary. Only showboat when it's safe. You get two young guys in an airplane that can do supersonic and flip-flops, and we are going to do that. But there's a time and a place for that. And just the idea that you do the job, and you never, ever leave a buddy. And I see that happening a lot. And it's nice to be a member of a team that's a team. And I kind of miss that when I got out and worked, in civilian life. I saw the beginning of this. No, I know your idea is going to work, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do my idea, even if it doesn't work. And that's just...
During your service, did you experience this kind of betrayal when someone left you?
Only once.
In what circumstances?
I'll just say that that person never had a chance to do it again. You do not abandon a person. So he didn't last long. We found another job for him.
What do you mean? Like, do you remember the circumstances when it happened?
No, I don't want to talk about that one. It was... He should never have been put in that position. He was a very highly educated, technical... he was an astrophysicist, for crap's sakes. But they wanted him to get some combat time so they could make him a colonel. And he came to us, and he panicked. First time he'd see a tracer, he'd just absolutely panic and leave the area. You don't do that. And he was flying with some other navigators. They came to me and asked me if I would fly with him. The other navigators were complaining about him. And so I flew a mission with him and came back down and said, he's got to go. He panics. He's going to kill himself and somebody else. And the next day he was gone. But that was really, like I say, it wasn't really his fault. He was in the Air Force to work in very highly technical area. And he was doing extremely well, but he had trained as a navigator. So they wanted him to have, before they would put him up for colonel, they wanted him to have some combat experience. He didn't need combat experience for what he was doing, and he was not cut out for it. So I bear the guy no ill will, but never did hear about him any time afterwards, so I don't know what he did, but that's the only time. Because it was, it's drilled into us in training and everything else, so.
Well, we have to record this for the future generations that will ask those questions and expect very concrete and solid answers from people that have been there. They experienced this. We don't do it for us, but we do it for your grandchildren, my grandchildren, that they will question.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this is I think it's important for the grandkids to know, and my own kids. And it's not something we sit down and talk about.
No. But at the same time, that's something that we live in with as a society, because on and off the subject is coming up at the same with questioning existence of the army and the role that army should play. So I would like to ask you about this. My first question is about the special place that Air Force is playing in the army. And
we are not in the Army, we are the Air Force. We used to be the Army Air Force, but we are not now. But we are teammates. And they train differently than we do because they have a totally different role to play in conflict. And they are absolutely amazing.
So what is the role of the Air Force in a conflict?
We have a dual role, other than we also have a role as simply deterrence. If you ever come after us, we're coming at you fast. We have a defensive role here and that was what I did for many years. Was our job was to stop any attacking force in the air. Fortunately, we never had to do that. Came close with the Cuban crisis, but and then other than that, we support. Well, I've got some Air Force people that'll be all over me for saying this. We support the Army. We provide the air cover for them, which was my favorite missions, was close air support for the Army. And then we also have a role in going ahead of the Army or going into the enemy's home country and disabling their ability to wage war. And that's, during World War II, the big bombers, that was their job. And the fighters' job was to knock down the enemy Air Force and then also to provide close air support to the troops on the ground.
What do you think about the ethical aspects of bombing civilian objects?
bombing purely civilian is a war crime, plain and simple. Going after the infrastructure, the plants, bridges, that kind of thing, just disabling their economy is a legitimate aspect of war. In many ways, that may be one of the more humane, because if they can't fight, then the killing stops. But we have gone into a very dark gray area of bombing civilian targets. You see that right now in with Israel and Hamas. Hamas buries itself in the civilian population. And if you're going to go after the Hamas, you're hitting civilians too. And where are the limits there? And unless you understand the situation, and of course I do not have that knowledge, where do you stop and where you don't? During World War II, Germany started bombing civilian targets by just going after London. And then the British and we retaliated and did it a lot better, which is not necessarily a good thing. We then started bombing civilian targets in Germany. And there were some horrific things that were done. Could we have won the war without it? Yes. Would it have taken more time and more deaths? Yes. But still, bombing civilian targets is one of those areas that you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think, like right now, over in Ukraine, Russia is simply bombing the towns, hospitals, schools, for no good reason. And I have the feeling that if Ukraine could, they would too. Just that they don't have the wherewithal to do that to any degree. They've flown some drones into Moscow, but war is not pretty.
How did you personally find mental strength to return from war?
Oh, I was eager to return from war. Although there's a guilt too, because I left and my buddies kept fighting. I was basically, because I was in and out, I was there for a 2-year period, which was, I think, good because I saw the war change. But
what do you mean the war change? Can you tell me in what sense change?
When I first went over, the idea was to stop the North Vietnamese from coming south and to disrupt their ability to support the guerrillas in the South Vietnamese that were fighting the South Vietnamese, And since we had chosen to try to do that, and we were actually trying to enforce a UN arrangement. And then it just got bogged down, and the powers that be decided that the way to do that was just to hurt them enough that they would stop fighting. We made virtually no attempt to destroy their ability to fight. And they were getting supplies, from Russia and from China, and we never did really attack those supply lines. Whether it would have been successful or not, I don't know, but we just simply decided to fight the troops in the field, and they had a lot of troops. And they were truly dedicated fighters. It turned into a political war, and political wars are, if you look down through history, are just terribly messy. Not sure there's such a thing as a non-political war. But if you have to go to war, for God's sakes, go to war. And fight it to win, not fight it to just keep the status quo. Because the status quo is killing. But now I'm rambling like an old man.
No, not at all. It's hard to find answers to questions that don't have one answer. But for that we need the individual voices like yours to understand, because you are one of the many people contributing to, at that time, to war. So we have to understand what does it mean, and also for you as a former combat soldier, as a member of the civilian society, where is your place? How do you feel with this experience? Do you think about that? We want to know.
Think about as little as I can. That was a transition going from military to the civilian workforce. Very frustrating at times.
What was the frustration?
Well, you'd come out and you'd have your meeting and you decide, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is what I'm going to do, da-da-da-da, and then you'd go back and you'd come back next week and they hadn't done it. Well, I'll get around to that. What the? I'm still not used to it. If you say you're going to do something, we agree that this is what we're going to do, then we do this. We don't say, well, yeah, but I just didn't feel like it. I don't understand that how that goes on. And I found it very difficult to adjust to people competing with each other instead of cooperating with each other. But if I let him do that and he does a good job, he might get promoted over me. Yes, then do your job better. And it's just, those. I never did adjust to it, I guess, but found it hard to work in that environment. But fortunately, not everybody does that. But I guess it was the hardest thing, adjusting to a lack of focus. I'm here to do my job. I'm not necessarily here to accomplish anything. I thought that was your job. I came in, I worked all day. What'd you do? Well, I worked all day. What did you get done? Well, I'll go back at it tomorrow. But I did have fun. Never had a job I didn't like. And that's why I say I've been so fortunate.
So what was your professional career after returning from war?
Various forms of educational administration. I had gotten involved in educational programs in the Air Force, and I had spent 3 years as an ROTC instructor. Came out of Vietnam onto a college campus, which was a real interesting transition. Walked right into the middle of all the protests and all that good stuff.
How did you feel about that?
I was ticked off. Maybe not fully, but I understood the frustrating part, that we're sending people over there and they're getting killed and we're really not doing anything. It's one of the reasons I became a diehard Republican. I couldn't stand the Kennedys. And Johnson was just dishonest and a liar about the war. He did some really good things in civil rights, but so I never had that kind of a problem with the students that were protesting and whatnot. And besides that, it was just good to see people who had something they really believed in. But when they put a bomb in my car, I took personal offense to that.
Oh, wait, what? What happened?
Oh, we had a staff car that we shared. And I walked out one day and was going to run an errand downtown, and hood wasn't closed all the way. And I looked at that and thought, that's not right. So have been somewhat familiar with booby traps in Vietnam. Walked over and carefully looked under it and looked, and okay, I didn't see any wires, but called the security anyway. And they came, and then we raised the hood, and there was a Coke bottle bomb laying on the engine. You take the one spark plug out, you fill a Coke bottle about that full of gasoline, and then put the spark plug in on the top and connect it, and when you turn the key, the spark plug sparks, and of course, when I went to the classroom, I never knew who was going to be there. That I actually enjoyed. Because you'd walk in and you'd see these guys in the long hair and the shirts and the sewed-on flags and all that stuff sitting in the classroom. And I'd already told the cadets, if they're in the classroom, get chairs. And I'd explain to them, this is an academic class, and I am going to teach this class. Why they stopped and listened to me, I'll never know. And you are welcome to be a part of the class. And when I was in the history part and we're discussing history, and would be delighted to your questions. And we had some good classes. And I never had any violence break out in my classrooms. Never had a disturbance that I had to stop the class. They broke the windows out of my office and that kind of thing, but it was an interesting time. But and I and an Army major from the Army, we decided we started to go out and talking to student groups. We made it known that we would welcome an invitation to come and speak. And we had a ball. We didn't agree much, but they understood our position. We honored their position. But then the Black Panthers came in and blew up the police station. We did have to do this in midday when we got the longest rings, but yeah, that was an interesting time.
Right. So let's talk about Black Panthers. What do you think about the movement?
Which movement? If you're talking about the Vietnamese anti-war movement, it is any American citizen's absolute right to protest, up to the point that they get violent. And that's, you have no right to stop me from protesting. I have no right to stop you from protesting. But then you would have it would break down into violence, and boy, it could get ugly in a heartbeat.
Did your parents leave at the time when you were drafted to go to the war?
Say that again?
Did your parents were still alive when you went into the war?
Oh yeah.
What did they think about that?
When I came back, was visiting my mother, and when I joined the Air Force, she knew I was going to do that, and and that was fine. She was a World War II person, so she had no problem back. When I came back, we were in the kitchen, and she said, "Did you kill people?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And boy, she blew up. My son, I didn't raise you, and all that kind of good stuff. And so we never spoke about that again. But yeah, that again, everybody's from war, and we're all very patriotic until the killing starts, and then people start having second thoughts. I wish they had those thoughts before. But so we both decided we would not speak of this again.
And have you never?
She didn't live much longer after that. And of course, I was in the military, so we would always try to get home at least once a year. It usually turned out to be twice. We'd go to Minnesota in the summertime. And if we could, we would try to go for the Christmas weekend. Because it was important, one, for both of us to see our families, and we really liked to have the kids see their grandparents at Christmas time. That was a good time. But yeah, we made a lot of trips back home and then for a while, my mother-in-law would spend summers with us.
What your mother-in-law thought about the
That
fact that
you had family discussions with my mother-in-law, and sometimes when my father-in-law was alive. But they never fully approved of me, of course. They didn't disagree with me before. You know, they didn't dislike me, but it was weird. My father-in-law's two brothers were Army chaplains. And that's kind of what he wanted to be, but he was the youngest son, which was was a reversal, but he had to stay on the farm, help his dad, and then he inherited the farm. And he was a heck of a farmer. But farming was not what he really wanted to do, but he did his duty. So I don't know if there was a jealousy part of that, or the fact that I had married his daughter, and I was the son of a divorced woman and a stepchild, and therefore I was going to inherit nothing, and I was not a good match. But we were always civil, and we would occasionally. He very seldom had any kind of fun, but. They would come visit us, and he loved to travel. So that's where he and I got along best. And boy, he was a smart man. But and Grandma Kaus was just a sweetheart, hard worker, and loved her grandkids, and so we got along really well. Married into a good family. I don't think they agreed. But yeah, it's like I say, she spent the summers with us for a long time, especially after her husband died. She would spend, which made no sense to me, but she spent the winters with her son, Gary, who was up in the hometown, and the summers with us in Florida. And I asked her once, why don't you flip-flop it? Be in Minnesota when it's nice and be here. And she just said, yeah, this is what Gary wants, so.
So she followed. So she followed that.
Well, yeah, she was an extremely, how do you phrase this? As a young woman, she was a rebel. She went and got a job on her own, and she worked for an early car dealer in the hometown, she and another young lady. And that was before the days when the railroads could really haul cars. So we were about 80 miles from Minneapolis, St. Paul, from the Ford plant. And they would take a train up to the cities, the two ladies, get in 2 new cars and drive them back to the dealer. That was unheard of in those times. So she was a real lady. She was just a little bird of a woman, but boy, I'll tell you, admired her greatly. And she had a sense of humor. I don't think I ever saw my father-in-law laugh. But Grace, my wife, came from good people. But yeah, we always got along. My father-in-law came up and spent a week with us when we were in Glasgow, Montana. And he was impressed with the airplanes. But he thought it was all foolishness. Never said that in words, but you could tell by the attitude, that when I got done flying, he hoped I would get a good job. But then he admired his 2 brothers who were in World War II as chaplains, so. But like I said, I've had a great life. I was lucky to be around good people almost all the time. But then after I retired, then I was working on my master's in education in Valdosta, Georgia, at what at that time was a state college in town, and was working, fell in love with community education. In those days, junior colleges, because they met the needs of the local community. And so I was working with a group, and we went to a neighboring town, which was having a problem. We did a social map of the town. And you had the population here, and by age group, the 18-year-olds were, and all of a sudden when they hit 18, that section of the population plummeted. And they were wanting to find some way to meet those kids, because they were all headed to Atlanta and other places. So we did a profile of the town, and the town basically had 2 industries. One was farming, pig farming, and the other was sewing factories. They had 3 factories in town that made underwear. That employs mostly women. And the pig farming, of course, is pig farming. And what they were doing was they would come down to Florida and buy piglets, bring them up there, basically turn them loose in the wetlands, swamplands, not true swamps, but wetlands. And those that grew up and survived, then they would sell. And that was mostly in the black community. So we did a study and applied for a federal grant and got a grant to start a program in the high school to teach kids. The other thing was construction. There's always construction going on, carpentry and masonry. So we started a program, and masonry and carpentry. So we went out and hired 2 instructors, and we started teaching kids carpentry and masonry. And the first thing we had to do was build a building to do that in. And fortunately, somebody came and told me that in Argentina they were building highways, and they were buying these big aluminum buildings from the U.S., and the factory that was building had a surplus. So we bought that and put that up. The other was daycare. There was not a single licensed daycare facility in the town. So we thought, we'll teach licensed daycare. So we did that, and we split the building in half and had to build a building inside the building to meet fire code. Used our carpenters and masons to do that, and taught licensed daycare. And we had mostly the students' kids in that. And what we did is they went to class an hour a day for whatever they were in, carpentry, masonry, or childcare. And then they stayed after school for 2 hours and worked in that. And we paid them for that. And then when we got that set up, we went out in back of the school. They had a big area, and built a hog farm, a modern, off-the-ground hog farming, and taught kids how to do that. And of course, to do that, we had to buy pigs, and we had to raise them, and we had to sell them. And the school then had a problem. Schools didn't make money. And we were making money. We were making good money. And we would hire out the carpenters and masons as apprentices. And so that was going, spent 3 years on that. And then the teachers union got me fired because I was a school administrator, and I had never been a classroom instructor. I had a master's in education, but not in classroom teaching. So the the county superintendent came and said, my hands are tied. I have to let you go. And he says, but I'll find something else in the school system here for you, because I want to keep you. So I'm sitting at home that evening and talking with my wife, Grace, and got a phone call. And it was from one of my college professors, and he says, I just got a call from the Mott Foundation, which I had been working with, who was big in community education. And they said, they want to offer you a fellowship if you're interested in going for a doctorate. And I said, well, so we talked about that, and they said Florida Atlantic University would like for you to come down and join their program. Okay, timing was perfect. So we went down to Florida Atlantic, looked around, did not like the community, knew that Grayson, at that time, my youngest daughter, was still with us, and this was not a place we wanted to live with her. And so I thought, well, I can commute. Heck of a commute. And so we're back and discussing again, and boy, I don't know. I'd done some work with a professor here at the University of Florida, and the phone rang, and it was him. And he says, would you consider transferring your fellowship to the University of Florida? I said, let me think about that, of course. So that's how I ended up coming down here. And for a year, I would commute. Drive down on Sunday evening, drive back Friday afternoon. And then got involved in some things around the town and with Santa Fe. And so some weekends I really couldn't go home, so my wife and daughter would come down and stay with me here. And pretty soon Grace said, this is a nice place to live. And about that same time, I was finishing up and got an offer here in town and thought, okay, so we moved here and been here ever since. That was 1980. And so worked with the joint position with the county and school system and Santa Fe. And then they decided that the community education idea was not what they wanted. And they had made some promises to me. I worked, 38 hours a week, so I was part-time. That way I had no retirement, no benefits, and this kind of thing. And I agreed to do that for a year. It turned into 2, and then they started this thing, and I went and talked to them, and they said, no, and we're going to cut back on the community education program. We decided we don't want to use our schools for that. So again, sitting at home, and we're talking about what do we do now? And the phone rang, and it was an old Air Force buddy. And he says, Ole, he says, didn't you used to do? And I said, yeah, I used to do that too. And he said, how would you like to do that in Saudi Arabia? And I says, no. And he says, the pay is, and I said, when do I start? So I went over to Saudi for a year, again had to leave Grace behind. She could come with me. My daughter couldn't. They don't allow American teenagers in Saudi Arabia. They said, well, we've got a school in Italy that your daughter can go to, and she could come and visit, and you could go. No, we're not going to do that again. So I went over to Saudi Arabia for a year, came back, and then got a job of all things with the University of Florida and worked there until I retired. So never been able to hold a job for any length of time. 22 years in the Air Force wasn't bad, but otherwise it's always been 2 years or so and then move on.
Yeah, sometimes life goes this way. I would like to ask you about your decision to move into the village. Why did you choose this particular community?
We'd lived over here in Oak Crest. We've lived in 4 places in Gainesville. Because when we were here, we were just here temporary, right? First. And then when I started working, went over there and decided that neither one of us was getting any younger, and too much house. So we moved into a condo, Gaineswood condominiums, lived there, and then Grace started having strokes. And I started having TIAs. And we decided that we probably need to, and I retired. And so we came out here and we were looking, and we decided the village was the place we wanted to be. And about that time, the kids called, said, we need a family meeting. So my daughter-in-law and my 2 daughters showed up, and at that time my son had already died, and they sat down and, Mom and Dad, we feel you need to move. They said, yeah, we're moving to the village. So they were getting ready to go and look for a place for us. We had already decided. So we moved out here. And
how old were you?
Let's see, I am 88, I was 82. been here 6 years in 4 weeks. Be here 6 years. Well, so the kids were surprised, but happy, because they didn't have to talk us into something. And it was a good move, and we made it just in time, because amazingly, once I moved out here, my TIA stopped. Of course, I was taking meds too, but Grace just progressively got worse. And she passed, coming up 2 years now, a little over 2 years. But this was a good move. Good place to live, if you can afford it. And with all my moving around, and like my wife, Grace used to kid me, he says, "You just can't hold a job, can you?" I ended up with 3 retirements, so I can afford to live here. In this level, if I move up, then it's going to get difficult. But this is a comfortable place.
So, in the past 6 years, did you see any changes in the community?
Oh, yeah. Revolutionary change with COVID. Centerpoint, which is the more formal of the dining rooms, they used to have a dress code, coat and tie. For dinner in the evening, you could not have to wear a coat and a tie for lunch, but it had to be long pants, no denim, collared shirts, and up here you could wear knit shirts, collared, no shorts, and if you went to the Seasons, which was the former, that had to be coat and tie. And so we had rules here. And then COVID hit. And everything changed. The programming here was much, I shouldn't say, was a little bit more formal. We had programs. And we had classes with the Santa Fe and tremendous. If you are not active here in the village, they will drive you nuts getting you active. But then COVID hit, and of course, Grace and I were in isolation 4 different times, 5 different times, because she would have a stroke or a UTI and go to the hospital, and we came back, 10 days isolation. So meals were delivered. You ordered the day before, and they'd deliver 1 meal to us a day. Virtually no activities. It was a year of waving to your neighbor. And of course, the hiring makeup here, the workers totally changed at that time also, because all of a sudden there was no restaurant they would cook and deliver. And then and when we came back, started to reactivate, it was bit by bit by bit. And so suddenly now we're no dress codes. And the nature of the activities have changed. They were much more sedate before. Now we're much more casual, much more fun, I think. And the labor force has changed. We do not tip here. So we voluntarily contribute to a fund, which at the end of the year is divided up according to the number of hours worked. And very few benefits for the hourly workers. So we have a rapid turnover in labor here. And some people fit it very well, and we've got some people who've been here for years working at these, and I don't understand how they do that, but so a lot of the fineries have disappeared. We've become much more casual. We are now, our activities are back in full force. If you're not active here, they will drive you nuts to make you active. But the whole flavor has changed. We have become very casual, which some people like, some people don't.
And what about you?
I can live in any conditions and be happy. But yeah, I like this better. I wish that we had when we were more formal, the food was better. Food ain't bad, but it was better. Because they took a little more time, I think, making it. Now it's more like going down to a middle-class restaurant. But we complain a lot about the food, but you don't see anybody losing weight here. But it's a very secure place. And I think the residents feel respected here. One of the things I was noting before we moved here, living out on the economy, once you got old, once you got retired, you didn't count for much. And out here, that is not a factor, which is nice. But I think America is that way. That once you're not working for a living, once you don't have a position, you really don't count anymore. Till it comes voting time.
Yeah. I have a question about your advice to people that are maybe thinking about retiring or planning for retiring time. Do you have any word of wisdom for such people?
Well, one, plan for it. And in all honesty, I really didn't. I was one of those people that I was never going to get old. Surprise! But I knew I had my Air Force retirement, and that's not a bad retirement at all. And then make the decision before somebody makes it for you. I see a big difference in attitude here by the people who come here because their children chose this, between those of us that chose it for ourselves. Most of them eventually come around because this, like I say, this is a neat place. But keep the decision for yourself. And there's a wide variety of places for old folks to settle down in. Who can afford it? And that's the other piece. For cripe's sakes, if you're young and working, plan for your future retirement. Now start putting money aside. Maybe you don't need a new car every 3 years. And don't, plan wisely. If you don't know how to plan, find somebody that can advise you because it's going to cost you. Don't neglect health insurance. Because when you get to this age, you have two big expenses. Housing expense, whether you own your house or rent, and the other is medical. And in this country, medical will kill you financially.
Mm-hmm. Deborah, is there any question that you would like to ask?
No, I was going to ask about how you liked living here, but I think we covered that pretty well.
And I especially like this building. It's large enough that we have a great variety of people, and small enough that we know almost everybody in the building. Where you get over to Cypress and some of the other bigger buildings, they're so large that you have communities within the community. Here, we have some people you never see. They choose not to involve, and that's fine. But if we don't see you once in a while, we're going to come knocking on your door and see how you are. But basically, this is just a very friendly, down-to-earth community. We are the second most economical place to live on the campus. So that makes a change also, makes a difference. And yet, I have not found a faction on this campus yet. We're all villagers, and that's kind of neat. It's kind of living in base housing, We lived in base housing, and that was our community. And also, just like in base housing, there's quite a turnover here.
Mm-hmm. Ollie, looking back from your position where you sit now into your life and in general the world, do you have any word of wisdom or word of advice for the future generations to come, just in general?
Get educated. And that doesn't mean just going to school. Learn history. Look behind the scenes when somebody has a project, has a philosophy. It's like communism. Communism is probably the most beautiful political philosophy that we have out there. It just doesn't work. Build a faith life, and that doesn't mean necessarily religion. Know what you believe in. Have a set of values and stick to them. And then realize that you have value and so does everybody else. Live your life, don't live anybody else's, and don't make anybody else live yours. And keep laughing. Find something to enjoy. And realize that family is probably the most valuable thing you have. And it doesn't have to be your brothers and sisters. Now I'm getting maudlin. But, and for God's sakes, yeah, keep laughing. Keep your sense of humor. And then realize that probably the most frustrating, funniest person you know is you. So.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your life story on behalf of Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at University of Florida.
Thank you.
And myself, and behind the camera is Deborah Hendricks. Thank you.
Thank you. This is my dad, and as you can see, he's in his filling station uniform, and I have a feather bonnet on. My dad, as almost all the men of his age at that time, were big hunters, especially during the war. Pheasant, duck, that's free meat. And my mother, Dad would bring the pheasants home and she would pluck them. She saved the feathers. And this was the first thing she made me, was a feather bonnet, Indian bonnet. Before she finished, I had a jacket and pants all of pheasant feathers.
Wow. That's amazing.
And you'll notice what a good-looking child I was.
Indeed.
Just a little bit closer. Okay, that's good.
I chose this one. This is my first bicycle ride. I could not ride a bicycle until I was about 8 years old. I had an inner ear problem, so I couldn't balance. Fell down a lot.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, it just went away. But I think later in life it helped me because I spent so much time in experiencing vertigo as a young child. Flying, vertigo didn't bother me much. It was natural. This is my brother, my sister, and I as children. And that was on an old stone wall built by the during World War II. I'm sorry, no, during the Depression. The WPA built a park in our town. And
which one are you? In the middle?
I am the one here,
Okay.
the oldest and best looking.
Okay. That's great. That was a great shot.
This one I picked because this is when we had moved to Manorville, and the parents had really just divorced, and Dad had come to visit us. And you can see the 3 very unhappy children.
Did you manage to build a relationship with your father after the divorce?
Oh, no. There was no love lost there. And that's my high school graduation picture.
That's fantastic.
hope you can get this one. This is when I was in cadets in 1957, and we had a party, costume party, and Grace had moved down to Harlingen, Texas at this time, so we went as Apaches, the French Apaches. And she had knits, those big knit stockings on. This is our wedding picture. And this is our daughter, our number 4 child.
What's her name?
I'm sorry, our number 3 child. That's Julie. Grace was so happy when I walked into her bedroom in the hospital. As she said, "We finally made a girl." And this is Grace and I and our sister-in-law, my brother's wife. This is me and my F4 in the Netherlands. Yeah, that was the last aircraft I flew. This I picked just because this is me returning from a mission. This is a later picture of Grace and I.
Mm-hmm. How old were you then?
Probably in our 60s. We were both still healthy then. And this is when we lived at Gaineswood in 1999. I don't know why I picked that one, because I guess because it was a snake.
Where was that?
That was at the Florida Museum, I believe. They had a snake display, live snakes. And this is later, after retirement, we were traveling. That was we took a train trip from Minnesota to Portland. Mm-hmm. And from there we took a boat up to Alaska. And that was after a birthday party here, and I still have my pointy hat on that they gave me. Actually, my daughter put it on me and made me take the picture. Here's on a trip back to the farm. And this is our first grandchild, Seth.
How old is Seth now?
He's in his late 30s, early 40s, and getting married next month. And this is my number 3 granddaughter on her 4th birthday. One of my daughters went and bought Krispy Kremes for it, because the night she was born, my granddaughter, her other grandpa and me, we were waiting at the hospital in and got hungry. It was midnight. We went out to get something to eat for his wife, my wife, and me, and the only thing open was Krispy Kreme. Oh, this is on our trip to the Holy Land and Palestine. And this was on the trail up to Petra. And this was just before we moved to here. This is when we lived in Oak Crest. And there's my distinguished retirement picture.
In what year?
That would have been 80. And here is the entire family. My daughters, my grandkids, my sons-in-laws. And this was a fairly recent picture of my oldest daughter and us. And of course, you got to get this picture of me in my 101. And this is me in my favorite F4. This is a picture of my mother-in-law as a young woman. This is my mom as a young woman, and she was Leona Hanora. And that's me again with my dad's hat at the filling station.
How old were you there?
I'm guessing probably 4 or 5. About the time like I said, I liked hats. Always have, still do. And I couldn't find my picture of me in my little suit and fedora hat on my first airplane ride.
Well, thank you very much for your participation in this
Thank
project
you.
and
This
for
was
sharing this.
this was interesting. I actually learned some stuff about myself.